Hello and welcome to Study with Sudhir, your digital classroom where we look at English syllabus in great detail, especially for ICSE class 9 and 10. And today we are going to be looking at the poem by William Wordsworth, The Daffodils. That's one of the poems which is part of the class 10 syllabus, and it is a poem written by this romantic poet called William Wordsworth, one of the most well-known poets in the English language. And before we get started with the poem, time to remind you that you need to subscribe to this channel and also press on the bell icon so that you can get regular updates on whatever we post on this digital classroom, and also spread and share the link with your classmates and other friends. And let's also look at who was William Wordsworth and how did he feel inspired to write this poem. And that's an interesting story in itself. He is considered one of the biggest romantic poets, and when we use the word romantic poet, it essentially means that he used commonplace language that you and I speak normally in order to express it in poetry, so that the common man and woman was able to understand it much better, much more easily. And he was also a great lover of nature, and that's what we find in many of his poems, especially in this poem called The Daffodils. And this note which is written in the book in fact tells you the story, and I would urge you to read it. Once when on a walk with his sister, he came upon the sight of a belt of daffodils. If those of you who do not know what daffodils is, you will find it on the thumbnail of this particular video. You can also Google it and check. It's a bright yellow, big, large flower, and when there are thousands of daffodils in bloom, that makes for an absolutely wonderful sight. So he saw a belt of daffodils beside a lake with the wind blowing along with the over the flowers. And the sight of this vast expanse of the yellow flowers is what inspired William Wordsworth to write this remarkable poem. He goes on to tell the reader that long after he had this experience, the mere memory of the sight of those daffodils would lift his spirits whenever he felt dejected or depressed, essentially whenever he felt sad. So this is essentially an eulogy, some kind of a tribute to the restorative powers of nature. Please mark this phrase. It's an important phrase which I would urge you to also use it in your answer, that it's a tribute and eulogy to the restorative powers of nature. Essentially means that nature has the powers to heal, that whenever one is feeling low, just the sight of these kind of wonderful flowers can actually lift your spirits, which is what we say. And in fact, one of the things that I had said in an earlier video is that it would always help to take a break and just go into a garden and spend 5 to 10 minutes looking at all those greenery, looking at the flowers, can actually do a lot of positive to your spirits, because you would be studying very hard, especially in the months before the board exams, and you would need all this kind of positive energy, and nature can really provide you with that positive energy. So there is this learning that you can actually take from this poem, The Daffodils by William Wordsworth, and actually use it in your daily life in the next few months, because there's a lot of hard work also to do. So let's get started with the poem. I hope you have the book in front of you, and also a pen and pencil, and also a paper, so that you can take down the notes which you can use in your answers during the exam. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high over vales and hills. Vales as in valleys. And the use of the word wandered. What does the word wandered means? Essentially moving around a little aimlessly. But at the same time, wandered lonely as a cloud. Now, what is a cloud? A cloud is something which can actually move from one part of the sky to another over the earth. So in that sense, it also conveys a sense of being very well traveled. So while wandered sense gives you a sense of wandering, moving around aimlessly, it also tells you that he is a very well traveled man. He has seen a lot of the world. I wandered lonely as a cloud. The third important word here is the word lonely. That means that he's alone, he's not having any company. Just like a cloud, each cloud moves around only. Though they are a part of a group, it actually moves around in a group. It's in a sense, along with itself, it's part of a cloud, and then there will be another cloud moving behind. So in a sense, there is a sense of being lonely while being part of the vast expanse of the sky that floats on high over vales and hills. High vales as in valleys, and hills as in the mountains. When all at once I saw a crowd. Okay, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. So while the cloud, he's giving you the imagery of being a cloud which from the top almost like a drone shot, is able to see a vast expanse of golden daffodils, golden yellow daffodils beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. So where is the location of these daffodils? It's beside the lake, just as he had seen it when he was traveling along with his sister, beneath the trees, because these are short flowers, so obviously below the trees, and fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Just look at the beautiful use of language, the power of language with which he has been able to kind of convey and create a wonderful setting of what a beautiful place it was, which the cloud was able to see from the top. So it shows the imageries of natural beauty which William Wordsworth has described right in the first stanza, right? And also the breeze is what is making the daffodils flicker and dance, and the poet obviously finds this entire scenery to be one of extraordinary beauty. Okay, continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way. Continuous as in it's an unending, because when he's seeing it, it almost looks like the daffodils are unending. There are so many hundreds and thousands of those golden daffodils. And twinkle on the Milky Way. Now, why is he making the comparison with the Milky Way? Because the Milky Way is the galaxy which contains our entire solar system. So obviously there are billions of stars and many planets which all kind of glitter and shimmer. So it's almost like the daffodils are like the Milky Way in terms of the sheer number of the daffodils, and he's comparing it with the solar system, the planets and the stars in the Milky Way. They stretched in never-ending line. Again, they just seem to go on and on. So he's just kind of again and again reinforcing the fact that there were just hundreds and thousands of these golden yellow daffodils along the margin of a bay. A bay is something which is next to a water body. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. So he says, I saw as many as 10,000 in just one glance, and they were tossing their heads in sprightly dance, which essentially means that they were dancing in a merry and a happy manner. So the 10,000 seems like an exaggeration, because obviously he will not be able to count, but he obviously means that there are so many of them that there would be more than 10,000 of such daffodils. So in the first two stanzas, he's been able to kind of create that absolutely beautiful sight of these yellow daffodils fluttering and dancing merrily in the breeze, and they are beneath the trees along the bay, and there are as many, and he's making the comparison with the Milky Way. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. Jocund as in being happy. So he's also conveying the point that nature is really the real wealth. The real wealth where you can derive a lot of happiness and enjoyment just by looking at such a happy and delightful sight. So he's saying that this is real wealth much more than the material wealth. The waves beside them dance. The waves beside them, I mean, whether it's referring to the water body where it is along, from where the daffodils are there, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee, but they looked far better than the waves of that water body. A poet could not but be gay. A poet cannot help it but be happy to see being in such happy company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. The poet looks on gazing at these beautiful daffodils. He's also comparing himself to the cloud, and he thinks about the amount of wealth, the kind of wealth that the sheer sight of this 10,000 odd daffodils had brought to him. So he's basically conveying the point that this is real wealth much more than the material wealth that he possibly otherwise had, and this is what brought him real happiness. The phrase what wealth, which I would urge you to underline, also means that it is talking about he's in a good mood. He's talking about memories of what he has otherwise and what the sight of the daffodils is bringing to him. For oft, when on my couch I lie in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye which is the bliss of solitude, and then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. So in the first sentence of the last stanza, he's kind of reinforcing, he's talking about the loneliness that he has, because he's already spoken about I wandered lonely as a cloud. Again, from the first stanza to the last stanza, he's coming back to the loneliness, that he would be lying lonely alone on a couch in vacant or pensive mood. Vacant essentially means that he's almost staring into nothingness. He's got nothing on his mind. It's almost like he's not thinking of anything, and he's in a pensive mood. Pensive is again something thoughtful kind of a mood, a thoughtful kind of a mind space that he is in. They flash upon that inward eye. Inward eye refers to his thoughts. And at that point in time, the daffodils come into his mind. He thinks about the daffodils when he is actually feeling lonely, when he's lying alone on the couch and he's having really nothing on his mind. That's when he thinks about those beautiful yellow golden daffodils. They flash upon that inward eye. Please underline inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And he describes it again, that when you are alone, that thought, that mere thought of the visual, the optics of those golden daffodils is what brings him happiness all over again, and he feels one with nature all over again, even though he's physically detached at that point in time, because he has captured it in the camera of his mind. And then my heart with pleasure fills. His heart is once again filled with a lot of pleasure and dances with the daffodils. That his heart dances with the daffodils. Just look at the power of the language. That's one of the most beautiful and remarkable parts of William Wordsworth's poetry, because with the sheer power, the sheer beauty of his language, the language that he has used, he's able to create such a beautiful kind of an imagery, such a beautiful scenery, and he's able to paint a canvas. He's able to paint a canvas of a very picturesque setting. Picturesque setting. Please use this phrase, that he's able to paint a canvas of a very picturesque setting in this 4 stanza poem. So even when he is lonely, he makes a point that he's able to think of it, and that brings him a lot of happiness. So the romantic poets, that William Wordsworth, he belongs to the category of romantic poets. They always think of returning to nature and using nature as an element in their poetry, because they believe that nature has that power in them which kind of can actually help people feel happy when they are in a low mood or a sad mood or a melancholy frame of mind, and lift the spirit of people when they are unhappy. William Wordsworth also makes a point and reinforces the point in this case, because it is nature which is able to actually, the thought of the sight of the golden daffodils, which is able to alleviate him, which is able to lift him from his present state of feeling lonely and pensive. Which the point that he is making is that nature, and in this particular case the sight, the memory of those golden daffodils is what makes it his best friend, nature being man's best friend. So the nature is not just a mere picturesque setting, but it's also able to kind of remain with him and help alleviate him, help lift him whenever he is in a low or a pensive state of mind. So the engagement of the poet with nature is the larger theme of this particular poem, and the point that William Wordsworth is trying to make is that this is very important, not just for that particular moment when you actually see that beautiful sight, but also otherwise when it's able to help you come out of a low frame of mind, listless frame of mind. The other points in terms of specific devices that William Wordsworth has used in this poem, and I would want to point out a few. For instance, when the poet is referring to himself as a cloud right at the beginning of the poem, and this poem, let me also make it a point that it was kind of seems to be based out of the Lake District of England. The poet compares himself with the cloud, and this is an example of what we call a simile, S-I-M-I-L-E, and it's a figure of speech where two things are compared using as or like, and here he uses as a cloud. He also uses expressions like crowd in the 3rd line of the 1st stanza, and also host of golden daffodils in the 4th sentence of the 1st stanza. To mean that he saw a large area covered with a whole lot of daffodils. Now in the last line of the 1st stanza, he also personifies the flowers. he also makes them almost seeming like, human beings by saying that they were fluttering. Now, who flutters? Either the butterfly flutters or the birds flutter. So he's kind of personifying the flowers by using a term which is otherwise used for butterflies or birds, and dancing, in this case dancing is done again by animals or human beings. So he's kind of humanizing, personifying the daffodils. This is another style which has been used by William Wordsworth in this particular poem. Also, by referring to it as a breezy day, we get a sense of what was the weather at that point in time on that particular day. The other use of simile is that when he compares it with the Milky Way, about which I have already explained, by talking about them as shining and twinkling, basically wants to make the point that the flowers are as heavenly as the stars in the Milky Way. He also uses the phrase never ending line. Also, apart from the fact that the literal sense of that there were so many daffodils that they seem to be continuous and they never seem to be ending, is also the larger meaning of this sentence is that the flowers seem to have an everlasting impact on him, and that also seemed to be never ending. And that's what we come to in the last stanza of the poem, where even when he's no longer seeing the flowers, the memory of it has been captured in his mind, and that seems to have an everlasting impact, a never ending impact on William Wordsworth. Then there is also the element of exaggeration, the use of the word 10,000 saw I at a glance. Now, this type of exaggeration is referred to as a hyperbole, hyperbole. It's essentially a claim which is not obviously to be taken literally, but it is a device used by a writer or a poet to kind of convey a kind of a larger than life kind of an image, in this case that of the daffodils. We spoke about the personification, about the daffodils being very, very joyful at that point in time. We have also spoken about the wealth, the real wealth, that is nature. And the fact that the poet does not see all this only as pleasant landscape. He doesn't see this just as a work of nature which is very beautiful to look at. He essentially sees life in them. And why he sees and how he sees life in them is because it is able to lift him even later when he is no longer physically seeing the golden daffodils. So, it's also a way of looking at nature with a sense of wonderment, with a sense of amazement, with a sense of innocence, and that is what is reiterated in this particular poem, that there is a certain element of innocence, there is a certain sense of wonderment with which he is actually looking at that nature and about how well it is able to elevate him. The phrase inward eye, as I said, it refers to his thoughts, his imagination, and the fact that the daffodils have become an everlasting memory for him, something which is never ending, even when especially when he's lonely, and that's when it really means for him a bliss. Bliss is something which is like humongous, something very large, a bliss, which a bliss of solitude. I mean, even staying alone becomes a blessing. And whenever he sees the flowers in his imagination, his heart fills with pleasure and his mind dances with the golden daffodil. So that's the explanation of the poem The Daffodils by William Wordsworth. I hope it's pretty clear. It's a simple poem, but more than the literal meaning of the poem, if you are able to explain the larger meaning that William Wordsworth has strived to put out in this particular poem, that's what will really enrich your answers in your examination. So all the best. If you have any doubts, do write in the comment section, and do share this video with your friends and schoolmates so that more students can get to understand this poem by William Wordsworth that much better. Thank you very much for watching.